I'm here today with Jan Broberg. Felt, yes, the
Jan
pronunciation?
Broberg, just Jan Broberg.
Yes, Jan
Just
Broberg.
Jan
Okay.
Broberg. Yeah.
Hi, Jan. Welcome to Composição de Crime podcast. My name is Diane Polizel, and it's a pleasure to welcome here you today.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here with you. I'm just thrilled to get any kind of time and message into Brazil. This is exciting.
Yes. But
Yes.
first, a message for my listeners who I can call compositores, and for you, Jen. I've talked to people for the podcast episodes with victims and family members, people involved with the crime, but I've never done an interview in English. It's my first time in English, so please be patient and forgive me my possible grammatical errors.
You sound terrific. I speak a little Spanish, but not Portuguese. So, um, if we did this interview en español, yo puedo hacerlo. Pero
I
está
don't
bien.
speak
Su
Spanish.
inglés muy bonito. I know it's different from Portuguese. Some
It's a
similarities.
little similar, yes, but
Yeah.
I'm not a fan.
Well, your English sounds perfect.
Thank you. So today, after all these years, uh, do you feel comfortable speaking openly about all the events, or do you speak out to help other victims, but you still feel bad about all?
I do speak out a lot, and I do feel very comfortable because I believe that once you are able to tell your story and be believed, and sometimes people don't believe you and they make fun of you or call you names, even though you're telling the truth. There's something very powerful and freeing when you can tell your story and get it outside of your body so that you can examine what happened to you and give it names. And now that I know that this man was a psychopath and a narcissist, and I was not his first little girl victim, nor his last, there were more girls after me and before me, and I didn't know anything about um, pedophilia and these kinds of criminal pedophiles back when I was 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. And my parents didn't know about that either because it was a new term. We didn't have the language. We didn't have people talking about these things. So none of us knew um, to be scared or to be cautious. We met this man and his wife and 5 children at our church. So when you meet somebody at a place of trust, you often know or think you know what they believe and how they are and how they will act and what they will do. And that isn't true. We always have to be very cautious about where we meet someone. It doesn't matter. We have to know that some people, many people that we get to know, might have bad intentions. And so for me to talk about my story and to have spoken out about it, to have made two documentaries about my story and a scripted 9-part series that is on Peacock, one of the streaming channels here, and is going out in various languages out into the world. It's very it is very freeing, and also I believe that it has helped me heal. Not that healing is ever over, it is a lifelong process, but I do feel very comfortable talking about every aspect of my story because I believe I'm the voice for many others who are still suffering in silence.
Yes. I will skip one of two questions because I see an interview for e-news, I guess, if I'm
Mhm.
not mistaken, when you said that people who have experienced some types of abuse or violence need, you just say that, to remove this pain, that trauma from within themselves. And this is true. I'm a psychologist and I can confirm that we need to free ourselves from trauma. And my question to you is, how did you manage to overcome all these terrible bad situations that happened to you? Did you do psychotherapy in some point in your life?
Yes. So going through, um, first of all, meeting this man and his wife and his five children. His oldest son was my age, and then he had other sons that were my two sisters' ages. So we became really close friends because they just lived a block and a half away from us. So we spent a lot of time with this family. So he really knew how to build trust, right? And so the main thing that he was building was trust, not only with me as, as a 9-year old, 10-year old, 11-year old, but also with my mom and my dad. And he had relationships with all of us. And we would do things together as two families, going on a boating trip or going on the snowmobiles where, there's lots of snow where we lived. We would also do sleepovers, and he had a trampoline and all the things that, we weren't quite as rich as he was. We were kind of a medium in the middle family. But he had a lot of things that he could use to bring us all together to play. And so when your trust is built so strongly that you feel like this is like my favorite uncle and these feel like my cousins, you have this wonderful relationship for almost 3 years. And then he takes this long held plan and picks me up from my piano lesson to take me horseback riding, and then kidnaps me, drugs me first. I don't know that he's kidnapped me because I fall asleep. And I wake up in the back of this motorhome with these funny voices playing in my ear. And I think I've been kidnapped by an alien, and that's what they sounded like, this kind of high pitch, da, 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 this voice like that. And it was so terrifying because a lot of the movies in the early 70s were based on the race to space. They were based on, aliens and life outside of this planet on other planets and UFOs. And so the terror that I had during that brainwashing period, and the the only person that I saw after about a day and a half, 2 days of those voices playing was him. I never saw him for 2 days, and then all of a sudden the door was unlocked and I could go. I was unrestrained. I had been restrained with straps, and when those came off, I was in and out of sleep. Um, I I saw him and immediately had all those feelings of safety. Like, oh my gosh, somebody that I know. I'm not by myself. It's like there's my favorite uncle. I can tell him what's happening, and maybe we can escape. So he had a very elaborate plan. And the first thing that I had to do once I was found by the FBI, uh, working with the federales in Mazatlan, Mexico. He took me from Idaho, which is a very northern, snow, like I said, and took me clear down, the coast of California into Mexico. And when I was found, the first thing that my parents and the police tried to help me do was to see a psychiatrist or a psychologist. But this was a new field. This was new. This was 1974. And it was not a common thing. So we didn't have a psychologist or a psychiatrist in our town. We had to go to the next biggest city, which was in Utah, Salt Lake City. The big city was a couple, 3 hours from our home. And so they would take me to this person, But because I was so traumatized and I still believed that they were watching me, that the aliens were watching me, and that I had this very important mission. They had told me that I was to have a child to save their dying planet, and that my mother was my mother. Her name is Mary, and my father was more like Joseph. He was taking care of me and my mom, but my father was like an alien from this other planet, and my mom just doesn't remember having me. And now I was supposed to have like Jesus or something to save their planet. And because that was such a an important story growing up for me, grew up a Christian, and so I knew that story. And this was just sort of a twist, a small twist on that story. I knew Jesus and Joseph and Mary, and that God the Father was the parent of Jesus. I mean, I grew up acting out that story. And so the fact that he used a familiar story is very, very much a brainwashing technique. And I didn't
Yes.
know that then. I thought it was real. I thought they could see me. I thought I had this very special mission. So when I was found and brought home, I still believed that this was true because, B, the that's what we called him, Brother B, or Birchtold, Robert Birchtold was his name. He planned this all out as if he also had been taken, kidnapped by this alien planet, and that he was supposed to be the father of the child that I was going to have to save the dying planet. So that's how he started to abuse me. The sexual abuse and the rape that happened to me as that little 12-year-old girl was because we had this mission that we had to perform before I turned 16. So we had 4 years that he set me up, and he continued to contact me, to show up in my bedroom even after he had been arrested but was out on bail. And so even though my parents did take me to a psychologist and then a psychiatrist, and they tried to get me to talk, I wouldn't talk. I wouldn't tell them anything. I would only deny that he had ever hurt me. No, of course not. B is like, my favorite uncle, and he would never hurt me. He would never hurt anyone. And of course, I'm still friends with his kids. We're still When I'm back home, we're going to school together. We're going to church together. He's waiting for there to be a trial. People think that when they catch the bad guy or girl, that then they just go to jail and it's over. That's not true. They get brought back to their hometown, jail. They process them, they get out on bail, and then they're still living a block and a half from you or in your own home, because most abuse happens by somebody that the child knows in their home, or a close family member, or a close neighbor or friend, which was the case for me. It very rarely happens by a stranger. So as I was trying to keep going on the mission, and I was taken a second time, um, about a year and a half later. I was taken again by this man, and the voices and the brainwashing continued. When I was found the second time, 3 months, almost 4 months later, he had put me in a boarding school in Pasadena, California, a Catholic boarding school. And so I went to mass every morning. I learned the rosary prayers. I knew how to act. I had always been an actress since I was about 7 years old. I had done my first play, and I loved to act, and really being able to be on stage was something that really saved my life during those years of being kidnapped, and in between when I was back home doing theater at my school and at my community was hugely important, because I couldn't tell anybody, or terrible things were going to happen. That's what I was told. So I couldn't talk to my sisters, my best friend, my mom, my dad, anybody in my church or other friends, and I certainly didn't tell the psychologist or the psychiatrist that the court ordered me to go to. I didn't tell anyone. So when that second kidnapping was over and they found me at the boarding school, I was really like a robot. I walked around in sort of a daze. I still wasn't talking because I was 14 when he took me the second time, 12 the first time. And there were still 2 more years that maybe we could have this baby to save the dying planet and that I wouldn't be vaporized because he had very carefully planned into the brainwashing tapes that if I didn't perform the mission and I didn't have the baby to save the dying planet, I would be vaporized at age 16. And then my little sister, Susan, she would be taken because she also was half alien and half human. And my sister Karen, who was the middle child, she would go blind if I didn't follow all the rules. So I didn't talk. I didn't tell anybody. I was terrorized in my mind and also my body because of the sexual assault and abuse that I was experiencing, but mostly because I thought I would be vaporized and that that would kill my body and my soul. And that was very scary to me because I had grown up believing that we have a soul that lives after our physical body dies. And I couldn't imagine not existing, you know? So it was definitely a very traumatic um, brainwashing story combined with the fact that I had all of this trust and love for this person who was, you know, like I said, like my favorite uncle. I had a favorite uncle because he was my dad's twin brother and he had 5 children. The first ones were all boys. So I was already close to my cousins. And this man and his wife and his 5 kids were just like my uncle's family, 4 boys and a girl, and so was his family, 4 boys and a girl and a little girl. And so it felt very natural to become such close friends. And so when I saw him, I trusted that I was with somebody who loved me, who cared about me, and yet he was doing all of these things to me. And that's the confusion for a young person, because when it's somebody that you already are supposed to love and trust, and you probably do, and then they start to hurt you, they always have a story, right? They have a story as to, you know, why you have to do these things, and or that they'll harm someone if you tell. So a lot of times I believe that those closest to the child do not see what is happening. First of all, they don't want to see it because it's so terrible to imagine that, you know, my husband or my brother or the grandfather or the best friend of the family or the person in the church that is, you know, in leadership in the church that you go to, or just another congregant, even that they could do something so terrible. So the first part that I had to unpack when I finally started to talk, when I finally told what had happened to me at age 16, because I didn't vaporize, I started to tell my sister Karen, my middle sister, and my best friend Caroline. Excuse me. And my best friend Caroline, they started to pull things out of me. So they were my first therapists, my best friend and my sister Karen. And as I tried to tell the story and I acted so weird, clawing at the carpet and crying and then being so angry, and just so many things started to come out of me, it really scared my sister Karen. And she said, you know, you have to tell mom and dad, you have to tell somebody, you have to get help. You know, she didn't even understand what I meant really by a lot of the things that I said. And I didn't talk very openly about the sexual assault and violence because it was just too hard to talk about. I just said, ooh, there were icky, yucky things, but I don't want to talk about it. But I did say enough that I scared both my best friend Caroline and my sister Karen. And they said, if you don't tell your parents, we're going to go tell them. And so I I went upstairs. We had our bedrooms down in the basement, and I went upstairs and went out to tell my mom and dad and to sit with them out on our porch, our patio. And I told them a little bit. I told them what I thought mattered the most and what I thought maybe that they could understand. I mean, I talked about the aliens. I kept saying, I don't think they're real, but I wasn't sure. I mean, I hadn't been vaporized. I had turned 16 and I had gone to a school dance for the first time, which I was forbidden to do. I could not go to a dance with another boy. And that was against the rules, but I didn't die. And so I finally went, is this real? I had this plan that I would tell my little sister about the mission. They called it the mission. My mission was to save this planet by having this child. And I thought, I'm going to tell Susan that she's also half alien, half human. And then if she doesn't want to do the mission, it's pretty icky and awful, but if she won't do it, then I'll kill her and then I'll kill myself. And so I had that plan around my 16th birthday. But here's where theater saved my life. This is part of my therapy, being in the arts and theater. I was doing a summer camp, a drama camp, and the play happened that we were performing the week after my 16th birthday. So I had been at the theater camp for several weeks. We'd been putting together this play. I met a lot of friends. A boy bought me an ice cream cone. I thought I was going to get vaporized. I didn't get vaporized. And he was in the play with me. And then we did the play after my 16th birthday. And I'm watching over my shoulder and wondering what being vaporized is going to feel like. Like, is it burning up from the inside out? I didn't know. I was scared every second, but I just kept going. I was still alive. And we did the show for all of our parents and families. And then I went home from the camp. And because that boy had bought me the ice cream, and because I hadn't been vaporized because of that, um, I had a little question mark in my mind. Is this real? Before I tell Susan and kill her and then kill myself, I have to know if this is real. So when I accepted a date in the fall, early September, for to go to a school dance with a boy, which I had never done before, I knew that if I came home and Karen wasn't blind, Susan wasn't kidnapped, Dad wasn't dead, you know, and that I wasn't vaporized, that it was probably not real. So I went to the dance, and sure enough, I came home and my dad was waiting up for me. And for the first time in a couple of years, I actually sat on the arm of his big lazy boy chair, and where he would always sit there and wait for us and make sure we were safe. And I sat by him and I kissed him on the forehead when I was done telling him about my date and the dance and that it was fun. And then and I hadn't shown him any affection because that was against the rules too. I couldn't be affectionate with my father, who I'd been very close to, and I couldn't go on dates with boys. I couldn't even talk to boys at school. I couldn't do anything like that. And all these rules that I had followed for 4 years of my life sort of melted away at that moment when I gave my dad a little kiss on the forehead, and everybody was in one piece. My sisters were asleep in their bedrooms. My mom was asleep in her bedroom. With Dad was waiting up for me, just like how I thought it would always be. And I walked back to my own bedroom and just laid on the bed with my long dress on and my big platform shoes, because I was a really tiny little thing. Because even at 16, I had not started puberty. So I weighed like 90 pounds. I was flat chested. I was just a tiny little girl still. And I laid on the bed and I just stared at the ceiling and thought, is this all a lie? It was so confusing. And I think the thing that people don't often think about in their healing process, like how did I get through all of that? Two kidnappings, all of the abuse, all of the assault, all of the brainwashing, which was a terror in my life that I had to unpack first of all, like not to be scared of everyone and everything. That was really hard. I don't think people often think about what happens when you aren't special anymore. There's also that part because a lot of times grooming and manipulators, when they are grooming you and manipulating you, they are making you feel special and that we have a special relationship. So, a grandfather can abuse a grandchild, but they go about it by making that grandchild special. And we do special things together that because because you're the special one. And that was a really big part of my first talking about what happened to me is that I wasn't special anymore. And I know that sounds really confusing, but that was the first thing that I remember talking to somebody in my 20s. It took me 5 or 6 years. I was a college student because I had talked to my mom and dad a little bit. I had talked to my best friend and my sisters a little bit about what had happened. And the first reaction that most families feel is, okay, she's told us we want this guy to go to jail. He went to jail for mental defect for 15 days. Or no, for 4 months. Sorry. The first time he kidnapped me, he only spent 15 days in jail. And because of so many reasons that I won't go into, but he was out again. He was already starting to groom another little girl. So even during my second kidnapping, he had already started grooming another little girl that lived in Utah because the family, after about a year, moved out of Pocatello, where we had met them 5 years earlier. They moved away. They went to Ogden because there was a lot of pressure with him being, in the neighborhood. And people really liked him and they said, well, you know, we know he just had a mental breakdown. He used depression, which was a brand new term also in the 70s. He had depression for his excuse for what he did. I just went through this depressive break and I was driving south and all of a sudden I was in Mexico and then you guys called the FBI so I couldn't come home. I mean, he had a story for everything. And that's the thing with master manipulators, with people who are grooming you to trust them and your child. They have a story for everything. So I just always tell people if something goes off in your gut or in your heart, like something is off, something is wrong, my child is acting different, um, you got to pay attention. You must pay attention to those things because they're so tricky. They're so they're so well versed at how to con you, how to manipulate you and build trust to look like one thing, but they're the total opposite. And that happens in families. That's the highest rate of abuse, of sexual abuse of children. It is first the father, then the mother, then a close family member like a grandfather and uncle, a sibling, an older sibling, and sometimes even a younger sibling. I have a podcast myself and I talk to survivors of sexual violence, assault, abuse as children, tweens, teens, that whole gamut. And it almost always is somebody in their family circle or their close friend
Mhm.
circle or a coach at school, at a sports team, or at a dance or theater. I mean, it's somebody they know. It is somebody that the parents trust if it isn't one of the parents. And so it becomes the responsibility of the the other family members to notice, to see the signs, to see what has changed. And then to not just turn away and go, oh no, I'm not going to look at that. That can't be true. No, you have to look. You are the only person that is going to be able to help that child. They are no match, for a 50-year-old or a 40-year-old, and they're, 10, 15, even 20-year-olds are no match for a 50-year-old. Their brains are still developing. They can't, they're not going to tell. They will be manipulated and too scared. Or like me, they'll be told they're special and they have this important mission and they won't tell. They just won't. You have to get smart and educated so that you can see this, so that we can stop this kind of abuse, because it is so life changing. So in my life, the trauma of all of this really destroyed my ability to have a trusting, healthy relationship. So that was the first thing that I had to unpack is that, can I learn to trust in a healthy way? And that was really the very beginning of that fear that I carried with me, that looking over my shoulder, looking in the back seat of my car, looking underneath my car. All of those things that I did well into my 20s were the first things that I went to a therapist and talked about. Like, why am I so scared of everything and everyone? How will I ever be able to see the truth? And it took me years because I had several unhealthy relationships and I didn't know how to have a relationship that was healthy. So I continued to see a people in the psychiatry arena, psychologists, also psychotherapists. Also, I went to uh, uh, basically a counselor that did relationship counseling. I did a lot of that. I also was able to figure out that my theater experiences were really an important part of my survival while it was all going on, and a part of my healing. So I do also believe that in the arts, music, drama, um, painting, I do a retreat for other survivors now, who are trying to heal and thrive. And at our retreat, we do, some collaging and art therapy as a part of the process for getting our story outside of our body, being able to see it on a page where you can cut out things and make these collages about your story or about something you're working on in your healing process, and how that can help us move forward. And so my experience was that as I continued to get on stage, to act, I became, a really good actress, and it became my life's work. I did that for a living. I did a lot of film and television later on in my late 20s, 30s, 40s, and to this day I still participate in film and television projects. And then I also, you know used my skills as an actress to teach drama to children. I taught creative dance because I knew that those things had had a huge impact on my own healing, because there's something about finding your self-expression that also has a healing piece to it. And sometimes you can't even put your finger on it, but it is truly one of the most important things that happened for me, was to continue to act even when I wasn't being paid, even when it wasn't my job. I just was always doing a show, always for the community, and then I'd get hired and that was great, and then I'd go back to doing stuff in the community, because all the things that I did really helped me understand more about myself. Because when you're exploring a character, you have to find the things that that character has in common with you. And we all have pretty much everything. Like, we could all become, you know, sorry, my dogs are barking. I hope you can't hear that.
Okay.
My mom must
No
be getting
problem.
my mother lives with me now. My mom has, a little dementia, but she still like walks the dogs and does the dishes and cuts down, branches and gardens and stuff. She can't remember some things, but she's really active. And so she always takes the dogs on a walk every day. And as soon as she puts her tennis shoes on, they start barking because they're excited. So,
That's good
anyways,
for her.
it is very good for her. And I love having her
Yeah.
here with me, since my dad passed away a few years ago. And so, anyway, I have have had a very close relationship with both of my parents and my sisters and my dear friends who were around with me through that time and right after that. That also was a part of my healing. I was very lucky to have a family that would talk about it if I wanted to talk about it, as I did when I got into my 20s and I had to write an English paper about my life. Again, narrative therapy, where you're writing, where you're looking at what happened, and then you're reframing. Like, do I have to have this terrible feeling of never being able to trust somebody in my present life? Could I find the skills to actually be able to trust again and to love again? Can I find those things? How can I get to the right therapist or read the right book? I had wonderful parents who let me, yell and be mad at them, like, why didn't you know, why didn't you see it, and they didn't ever try to defend themselves. They just listened and they just said, we are so sorry. That's the greatest thing you can do for a friend or a child that wants to tell you their story and that wants to tell you how mad they are, or how hurt they are, how sad they are that they lost, these years of their childhood and their innocence. And if you will listen with intent and not try to fix them and not try to defend yourself like, well, I would have done it, but I didn't know. And I just, da, da, da. It's not about you. It's about listening to them. And that's what my parents were so good at. And I know they didn't even know that that would be such a huge benefit to me in my healing. But if you don't have parents that will listen, or your abuse happened from at the hands of a parent, do you have a sibling that will believe you, that you can trust? Do you have a good friend? And then you have to kind of tell them, what I need is for you to just listen and acknowledge what I'm feeling and just be empathetic and show me
Yeah.
empathy. If you will just do that, you will help someone who has gone through childhood abuse, probably of any kind. I know for sure that the sexual abuse, which is so, when we talk about arrested development, it just stops your development when you are sexualized at a young age where you are unprepared for any of that. It is so confusing. Your brain development and your ability to develop healthy relationships and all of those things is so torn apart that until that person has someone that they can trust, that will listen to them, acknowledge what they went through, and they can get it outside of their body to examine it and then to start on that healing path, it's really hard because you keep it all in. Most people never, many people, not most, I think it's changing now, but many people still in their 50s, 60s, 70s don't talk about what happened to them. And I believe that that is like holding on to, an infection, of any kind. You hold the infection. I'm not going to get treatment. I'm not going to let it out. I'm just going to let that, thing that's like cancer just eat away at my soul and myself and my self-esteem and my self-worth and my relationships. And I can't trust anybody. And so that just grows. You don't get treatment, it's going to grow. And so that's where I'm like, would you not brush your teeth for weeks and months and years on end? Of course not. You brush your teeth so that you don't get rotten teeth. When you talk about what happened to you, it's like brushing your soul. It's like it's like disengaging the lodged piece of yuck that's there. And it's not even your yuck. You didn't do anything wrong. You didn't put it there. Someone else did that to you, but nobody else but you can let it out, can get rid of it, can heal from it. You have to do that work. So I think that's really important that I knew, because I had parents who, when I wanted to talk about it or yell or cry, they listened. They did not defend. They did not say, "Oh, it's okay. You're going to be okay. Yeah, but look at your life now. It's so wonderful." They didn't do that. And I think that's really important for people to know. Don't do that. Listen. Listen with intent. Listen with intention. So so basically what I'm saying in my own healing process and how I survived and now thrive in my life was really these three things. First of all, telling my story, getting it outside of my body, and telling it to people, first and foremost, who believed me. I have an online community, and I hope it goes worldwide someday. Um, I actually do have one woman on my community from Nicaragua and one from Canada. So there are people in
Mhm.
other countries, but time differences. Someday when it goes worldwide and we can have group meetings at all different times of days, that's been the most important part of my online community, is a safe place to be believed, that you are seen, you are heard, we believe you. Because so often that's what people don't do. They're like, "That's impossible. That's your uncle. That's not true. You make up stories." It's all of this other stuff because the person hearing it can't handle it. They can't handle the
Mhm.
truth. And so that poor child or teenager or even young adult is still carrying the burden, like, I did something wrong. Because they know that it's true, but now there's no one to help them out of it. And so the abuse either continues or it gets worse, or when they finally are out of it, who do they talk to? That's the first thing that I have done that I know was a huge piece of my healing and beginning to be on the healing path, the journey of healing. Tell your story, even if it's one person that you prep and say, "Don't try to fix me. Don't try to tell me how great my life is. Don't try to minimize what happened. Don't try to defend. Well, I'm sure he just didn't know what he was doing, or he was just your older brother." Don't do any of that. Listen to me. Listen to my story with empathy and believe me, and then tell someone your story, because it helps to get it outside of your body and your head and all those things that keep going through your head, like, "I'm worthless. Oh, I can't have a good relationship. Oh, um, I will always make the mistakes." And then what happens is then a person starts to do all the other things that come from trauma. They start to self-medicate. They start drinking. They start doing drugs. They start cutting their bodies. They start to become anorexic or bulimic. These are the things, they are the same outcomes. They have compared sexual abuse and assault to a combat veteran who comes home from war. He knew who the enemy was. This child, this young person, thought the enemy was their trusted, loved friend or family member. They are so confused and so hurt. And they compare the outcomes, the rage, the sadness, the depression, the anxiety, the drinking, the drugs, the cutting, all of the
Yeah.
things that happen to a combat veteran, right? And so if people understood that that is a war, that that little person, that young person has fought alone, they need you to listen and believe them first and foremost. The second thing that I talked about was the fact that I had, first of all, I had people like that in my life, my parents, who listened. And when I needed to get it out, I did. The second thing that they did, which they didn't even know they were doing back while it was happening to me, is they encouraged me in the arts. So had always been in the community plays during the summer and the school plays, and they encouraged that. They somehow knew that those things were important. So encourage your child, your young person, if they are into, music, dance, drama, painting, sculpture, um, whatever they can do, writing, these are things that will also help repair your brain after trauma. When you do those sorts of activities, you are learning things and you're creating new pathways in your brain because you're seeing the world in the way that art allows you to see it, and it changes the trauma and the pathways in your brain to start to see that you're not alone in trauma, because usually you're looking at sometimes beautiful things and sometimes really horrible stories and things that you are humanizing the human experience. So the arts. The third thing that really has helped me was definitely finding good therapists along the way. So whether it was a psychologist when I was a little bit younger, really all the psychotherapy that I have had has been very positive for me. But I do think it's important that you find the right fit for you. You find
Yeah.
the right therapist at the right time. I changed, I moved several times throughout my married lives. I've been married and divorced several times, which has been sort of the aftermath, I think, of that trauma in my trying to understand how to still have a grown up, healthy relationship, because I didn't get to go through those stages as to have a crush on a boy when I was 12. I didn't get to do that. And then to maybe have a boy hold my hand when I was 13, and then maybe to go on a little group date at 14. And, I didn't get to do those things. I missed out on that natural development. And so I'm still trying to figure out how to be a grown up and have a really good, stable grown up relationship. Um, but I think I'm getting closer to that. So, like I said, it's a journey. So I think having the right therapist. I had depression at one time in my life, and I took medication eventually for that, which really helped me. I didn't have to stay on it forever. For me, it was just my good feeling hormones. The serotonin must have been really low. And as soon as I had been on that for about maybe 6 months or so, I felt so good again. Like, I didn't struggle with chronic depression or anxiety, but I have had a little anxiety in my older life, that I've also talked to somebody about and have learned how to breathe. I have breathing techniques that I do. So I know that there are, somatic healers is something that I'm learning about, where trauma is stored in the body, in the muscles, in your, and so I've had some, um, like massage therapy and certain places where pressure
Mm-hmm.
points and those sorts of things. So there's a whole gamut of things that I have tried and felt have been successful. I remember one time my cousin Audrey, she is a massage therapist and many healing modalities that she is so talented with, and she was doing some work on me after my documentary came out. So this is just back in 2019, and I was so bombarded by thousands of people telling me a couple paragraphs of their story. They'd just say, "Oh my gosh, seeing your documentary, now I can tell my mom about my stepdad, and or about my doctor, or about my dentist, or about, my school teacher, or my coach, all of us." And they're telling me a little bit about their story. And I'm getting chills about it right now because I remember knowing the statistics, knowing that in the United States, I don't know what the statistics are in Brazil, but in the United States, the statistics have been upgraded currently that 1 in 3 women, girls, before the age of 18 will be sexually assaulted in some way, and 1 in 4 boys will be sexually assaulted in some way before the age of 18. And for some, it's ongoing abuse. It's, horrid, which, but also for others, it's just being exposed to pornography and sexualization at an age that they shouldn't be exposed to it. That changes something in their developing brain, and it's not going to be good. It's going to affect them for the rest of their life. So I think if we could get really honest about how important it is that kids get to be kids, tweens get to be tweens, and teenagers are meant to be independent thinkers, and yet they still need rules and boundaries and parents to say no. And you can't drink underage and you can't go to that party. They still need people to protect them because those are the places where they end up getting raped and sexualized. And so you just have to be really aware that your job as an adult is really important, whether it's to your own children or to somebody else's child, that you can see that something's wrong. I've had several people tell me that my best friend's mother is the one who called Child Protective Services because my own mother couldn't see what was happening. She couldn't handle it, or she ignored it because she needed the financial support or whatever, which I understand. There's all of these complex reasons why people don't report. And then oftentimes the system that we report to lets us down. That has to be fixed too. Because, like in
Yeah.
my situation, my parents had never been involved in any kind of a crime, maybe a speeding ticket, but they didn't have any idea the questions to ask, what is okay for us to do, or they didn't get some sheet of paper that said, here's the rules of engagement in the legal system. This is what you can and can't do. This is what you should do and shouldn't do. They had no idea. And I think that happens a lot where, child services, protective services come to the door. Well, who answers the door? The abuser, who has a story to tell them about why, oh, my child with their overactive imagination, or oh, this or oh, that. Plus, it's usually a man talking to another man
Yeah.
many times, or a man talking to a woman who's trying to find out who is outmatched in a different kind of way. I'm just, I guess my point is that I was lucky enough to have parents who listened, to have the arts as my therapy, even during that abuse, in between doing plays, doing musicals, singing, with my sisters. We did those things, and that was hugely helpful. I would not be here. I would have been dead if I didn't have that play and that drama camp.
Yeah.
So that kind of stuff. So that third piece where you really do look for the right therapist and you are not ashamed of having the experience that you had, where you realize that you're worth the money that you have to spend on therapy. You're worth what you have to do, whether it's something I did. It was called EMDR. That was a thing that I did that was helping to connect the brain with my story, where your eyes move back and forth with the light.
Mhm.
And I was telling my story, but what it does is it allows it to be just a story instead of it to run your life. And so I can tell my story anywhere, anytime. Sometimes I can get emotional about a certain piece of my story or something, but really, and that's okay too. I don't mind getting emotional, but I really have done so much work to be able to see my story as something that happened in my past that I only refer to in my present if it can help somebody else, if it can give somebody else a voice, if they can see themselves in my story and know that there are safe places that you can tell your story. My online community, Thrivivors, it's about thriving. It's about survivors who want to thrive. So it's called Thrivivors. Maybe you can put it in your notes if people want to find it. that online community. That's a safe place where you can tell your
Yeah.
story to a group of other survivors if you want to. And I bring in therapists to do a little, like an hour long, not a session. We don't claim that we're doing therapy, but our therapists are licensed people, or they're trauma informed people, or they're detectives who now work with sexual assault, who really care and are empathetic, and they can, kind of help you through the legal questions of the system. I've had a number of people that have done everything from how to get back your intimate, sex life after being abused and raped. I've had people come into our community and do an hour long session and then question and answers. Um, but it's really just wonderful to be with your peers, people who understand because they've had the same lived experience. They've lived through something similar. And just to have that support of those peers who can really listen and understand is really helpful. It's like a group online community. So anyway, that's been a wonderful thing for me and for other people in my life. Thank you. My son is just handing me a drink of my favorite cup of joe.
Um,
See, these are all shows that I've
it's
done.
nice.
South Pacific, Cats. There's Cats. And Peter Pan. This is
Nice.
a mug they gave us after a summer at a regional theater that I worked at, and I love
I
doing.
love cats.
Isn't that a fun show? Yeah, it was great.
Yes.
Mm, and
First, I saw the documentary Abducted in Plain Sight, but listening to you speak now, it's much more harder to listen than saw in my
yeah,
television. Mm. Hmm.
and it's interesting because that first documentary, I I knew I wanted to tell my story, but I didn't know how. I just kept telling people, I'd tell my lady that was cutting my hair and she'd say, "Oh, my husband works in the entertainment industry. Maybe he's an agent." And I was like, "Oh, really?" And I didn't know that, and that was the first time that I was living in Los Angeles because I was pursuing my acting career. And I have my little boy who just handed me that cup of coffee. He's now 34. He was like 4 when I moved there. Um, and I talked to him and he tried to shop it around. So that was 30 years ago. So I tell people, yeah, you're an overnight success after 30 years of telling people, or 25 years of telling people your story. And finally somebody goes, "Oh, I want to help you tell that story," because he tried, but back then, 25 years ago, everybody was like, "Oh, nobody will tell a story about abuse of a child. We can't get that story told." No, nobody. But true crime hadn't happened. The big, this
Yeah.
hadn't happened yet. Podcasts hadn't happened. There was none of this. And so in 2014, when I happened to be, again, in the weirdest way, Mom and I had published our little self published book, Stolen Innocence, in 2003. So this is now 11 years later. I'm still talking to people, trying to get people to buy our little book or have me come and speak. For no, I wouldn't charge anything. It was all for free. I was just like, I just want to raise awareness. I just want to educate you. I just want to prevent this kind of child abuse from happening. Your child doesn't have to be kidnapped to be abused. It's happening right now in your neighborhood, in your church, in your home. I want to talk to you about it. And so I happened to leave a book with a manager that I was, you know, helping. I just answer her phone once in a while. And I had moved again back to Los Angeles. I was there with my little son for about 5 years. And then I moved back to Utah, and then I got married again. I'd been married and divorced several times. And so I moved back here and I ran a theater here. And anyway, I'd gone back to LA and gave her this self published book just because she was my friend. And then again, like 2 or 3 years later, in 2014, another person who was just there to kind of help this manager, and kind of learn about the acting business world and how agents work and managers work. We did it for free. 3 years later, another girl does that and picks up my book off the shelf. and starts reading it in between phone calls. And she's like, "Stacy, do you know this person?" And she's like, "Yes, she was doing what you are doing right now for me a couple years ago." "Oh my gosh, can I take it home?" And she read it all night. And then she got back to Stacy and said, "You have to put me in touch with her. We have to tell her story." Who knew that that's how it would happen in the most strange way? I didn't have any money. I didn't have money to produce any kind of documentary. We found a wonderful filmmaker who made that documentary, did all this research. We helped try to gather research. I tried to help, but really, I didn't really get a lot of money or anything from that project, but I got the message out. And because that first documentary was just every headline, like it was all true, but some things were left out. Like when my parents, if you remember, they signed some affidavits saying, we don't
Mhm.
want to go forward, we want to drop this. Well, 3 days
Yeah.
later, they changed their minds because when they talked to their friend at the FBI who said, "No, he did a terrible thing, even if that," because they didn't know he had sexually assaulted me or anything. They just knew he took
Uh-huh.
me to Mexico, but he was crying. His wife was crying. "What am I going to do? Bob would never hurt, would never hurt Jan. He just had a manic depressive break," which were words we barely understood. And so, mom and dad didn't want to put me through more trials and all this stuff. So his attorney calls, he goes down and talks to her, and they sign these papers that'll make it all go away. And then the FBI
Mhm.
agent says, "No, this is what's not in that documentary, that first documentary." They're like,
Mhm.
"No, it has to go forward. He did this thing. He has to be held accountable." And so then they rescinded that. So you don't get the rest of the story. You only get the headlines of the story in the Abducted in Plain Sight. But because it was so well done, that's what got other people, when it went viral, because it went viral all over the world, which I never expected. I never knew that would happen. I'm asking my friends and family, "Can you give $10 so we can hire this really, really amazing editor for our documentary for one day? We need $3,000 to hire this person." And they're giving me $10 and $20. And I mean, it took 5 years. That all started in 2014, and it didn't get, bought and put on Netflix until 2019, when it came out. And I didn't know it was going to go viral. I didn't know if anybody would ever watch it. I had no idea. But that's what gave the opportunity to me to be able to then do the scripted series where it's 9 parts with real actors playing my mom and dad and me and my sisters, and my best friends. They're all in the series. And my FBI agent, now my father's passed away, and my FBI agent has passed away. So I'm so glad that we got all that footage in that first documentary with them. Most of it's not even in the first documentary. We had like 70 hours of footage, and it's 90 minutes long, So you can only tell, because really the story is like a 9-year story, because we met them when I was 9 and it wasn't over till I was 17. And then he still was in my life. He would still call and find me in my apartment in Utah, at school at BYU. I had gone to school, 3.5, 4 hours away from my home, and he would find me. He was still terrorizing me. He would call my apartment. Back in the day where you had a phone on the wall, you didn't have a cell phone. How did he do it? Why did he continue to terrorize me? I don't know.
Mhm.
I'm just glad he's dead. um,
Yeah.
so anyway, those are the stories of how much the what my healing journey was when I asked my mom, "Will you please write down everything that was happening at home?" Because my mom's father, my grandfather, passed away when I was missing the first time. And so my mom was grieving her daughter, didn't know where her daughter was, didn't know if I was dead or alive, didn't have any idea what was happening. And then her father passes away. And so I wanted her to just write down, and so she would interview me about what was happening on my end. And so that's what ended up happening. We published that book in 2003. It was supposed to just be our own family history, but then we were encouraged by somebody who heard our story when we spoke at an educational conference, because my neighbor was like a school counselor. She's like, "You got to come to this big conference with all the educators in all of Utah and speak." And I'm like, "I don't have anything to say." She's like, "Oh, yes, you do. I've read your little self. You gave me one of the first copies of that little book. And now that I've read your story and you've talked to me about it, I had no idea. I mean, you have to come." you know? And so I did. And mom came too and did a Q&A after I spoke. But I didn't know that I had all of this to say. I didn't know that just telling my story could be so helpful to so many people, to educators. I'm like, I don't have a PhD. I don't have a psychiatry or a psychology degree. I'm not a licensed anything. I'm just a person with a college degree, you know. Um, but finding out that all of that, when mom would interview me and everything that I would write in my English classes and then call them, and I'm so mad, all of that, all of those things were helping me heal. All of that talking about it, all of that writing about it, going through mom's book, that first book, writing a second book, the Jan Broberg story that's available on Amazon now today, that tells even more of the story and has, a really good forward and afterward about how do you spot master manipulators and groomers? How do you stop child abuse in its tracks? You have to be willing to look, listen, and see what's actually happening. And then you have to make the phone call. So, all of those pieces of my life that have unfolded with that first documentary that gave me this opportunity to have this 9 episodes of my story, which I'm so proud of because it really leads you through how it happened. How can this happen? And you see what a manipulator, what a grooming process looks like, because he looked like our best friend. He looked like my favorite uncle. I was not afraid of him in the least. I was afraid of the aliens. I didn't like what he was doing to me, but I thought he had to. It's just so interesting now when I watch my story, and I'm watching it again. I'm actually watching my 9-part series again with my last ex-husband. We're really good friends. I'm trying to be an adult and he's like, "I can't watch this without you, because I know you're okay, but it makes me so mad. It makes me so sad. I can't watch it without you." And it's been out now for a year. He's like, "I'll come over and I'll watch it with you." And so that's what I've been doing. I've been watching it again with him. And I just am so proud of how we were able to tell the story because it's so true. It isn't all just the headlines, which is most true crime. It's just this headline and that
Mhm.
headline and this, it's all of the nuance, all of the things that happen in between and before and after that continue. The groomers continue. They continue to manipulate the system. The second time he kidnapped me, he got off on mental defect and he went to a mental hospital, which is where he met the mother of his next 9-year-old. She was the intake person at the mental hospital, and he charmed her. Saw the picture of her daughter on his desk, and she was the next one. There was one in between me and that one, and there were at least 3 more after that one because I've talked to them. So I know of 7 of us that were all abused and mentally tortured by the same man. And the FBI here says an active criminal pedophile who is acting upon the pedophilia will perpetrate 30 to 70 children over the course of their life. So I may only know 7 of the many who were actually perpetrated by this man. That's a lot of lives that have been
Yeah.
affected. And if I had known then what I know now, I would have tried to, um, go after him. But there was a statute of limitations then. You only had 10 years. So by the time that I was, 24, I would have had to have done it because 14, I mean, I guess maybe it could have stretched to 16 because there was one time right before my 16th birthday, and before I went to the drama camp, that he, because he would know when to call when either mom was gone or something. I don't know how he knew that I would answer the phone, that I was home from school. And I would get notes sometimes from people I didn't know at school and go to this phone booth, and he's going to call you, because I still think I'm in the mission. And so he would, and he'd tell me what to do next or where to meet him. Go stand on the corner of, Center Street and 19th, which was 4 or 5 blocks away from me. And I'd get on my bike or I'd take my car. I was driving by then. By the time I was 15, we could get a driver's license in Idaho, and I'd go meet him, and then he'd take me and rape me. Got to do the mission. So, I mean, there were still some incidents. So maybe I could have been 26, but obviously I was just barely starting to really talk about what had happened to me. It wasn't until I was 30 that I really knew I have to tell my story. And really at 27, when my son was born, um, I had a friend. I was working at Disney World. I was a singer, dancer, actress, not any of the princesses, because I wasn't pretty enough for that. But I was a great actress and a great singer dancer. And so I do all the live shows. It was really a fun job. And then when I got pregnant and, Disney was great, I got to basically stay home and nest and have my baby. But I had a friend that I had worked with there who asked me to come and talk to her book club. She had started a little book club, and most of them weren't even married with kids. She had a child. She was a single mom with one child, a son, about my son's age. And anyway, I went and spoke to the book club, but I was like, I didn't have a book. I was like, what am I going to say? And she's like, just tell your story. It's really, really, not only is it fascinating, but honestly, it helps us all understand either stuff that's happened to us, which kind of indicated to me that something had happened to her when she was younger. And she goes, it's just good to have somebody that will talk about what happened to them, because most of us who've had something happen, we're not even talking about it yet. And so I did. And that was the first time when the questions they asked and the things that I was able to say that came to my mind, I was like, oh, maybe I do have something to say. And then at age 30, I went through another workshop. See, here's all my healing things that you asked me this initial question, and I've just talked nonstop. Did you have other questions? But here's another piece of that healing journey, is that at age 30, I went to a kind of a 3-day workshop, and it was called the Landmark Forum. And Landmark Education does all these different things. They do them on communication, on, you have a project that you want to accomplish, you go to this thing called team, and we set the goals. And anyway, there's all kinds of really cool like courses that they do. And I heard about it from a friend, actually from my second husband's sister, who had just done it. And she said, you don't even need to go find out about it, just go do it. It's so amazing. And it was for me. And I was 30 years old, and it just allowed me, by the end of the third day, it was like my past was really my past. I could see it so plainly. It was like on a dry erase board, like, here's my past, here's all the things, and the whole board, it was just messy and full of all this crap and everything that had happened to me, and all of this stuff. And then it was like, on that last like session, it was like, okay, now you get to choose to erase all of that, because it's in the past. There's nothing you can do to change it. You can erase it, and literally erase it in your mind's eye, and then you have the brightest color marker, in your hand, or the darkest, deepest black marker in your hand, whatever you want to write on that board. You choose. You get to choose, because you're an adult, and you now understand that your past is your past, that your future is in your hands, that your present moment, your right now, you write, you create, you decide, you determine what it's going to be. And there was something so empowering about that 3-day course workshop that I did, that I literally saw my life differently. My life was exactly the same, right? It wasn't like somebody magically handed me $1 million and a new car or any of that. Life was still hard, and it was the same. And I was going through a divorce from that second husband, when his sister told me to go to this thing, And I told him to go, and he went. And I was like, can we work out this marriage? And he was like, well, what I got out of it was that we are so different. We should not work out this marriage, but I will help you get set up in LA because you should tell your story. And that's what he did. So again, some people are there for a long time, some people are there for a short time. And luckily, I was able to learn something very valuable from each one of my marriages. I got my son from my first marriage. I got back to LA from my second marriage, and I learned that I was in control, that I was the creator. I was the person that got to say what's going to happen. And so when I have my past get in the way of my present, I know what to do. It was really powerful. So I think that is like a turning point for people. If you can get to a place where you can actually see and be heard about what happened to you, you have to be heard first and believed. That's really important, and it's outside of you. And then you can see all the things that happen and you can write them down, maybe in a book, maybe on a whiteboard. Somewhere you can start going, this just makes me so angry, or this is the thing that is like, I'm using my hands all over the place. And I know this is like only audio, but anyway. um uh well, no, you said you will put it on Instagram or whatever, and it will be
Yeah,
video too,
yeah,
right? Okay.
yeah.
Anyway, as I was able to see, and certain things I couldn't let go of, certain things I was holding, I still held on to. And it took more, different therapists, different books I read. One was called Feel, like your feelings, feel the fear
Mhm.
and do it anyway. And at my retreat, one of my online community members who came, because this is an in-person retreat, and so 14 of my online community members that are from all over the United States, Canada, Nicaragua, like I told you, they're from all over. 14 of them came to our bed and breakfast. My sister and I run operate a bed and breakfast, and we closed it down to the public, and it was just our survivors who are trying to thrive. And we did this week-long retreat, and one of the best things that came out of it was do it afraid. I loved that somebody had either read that or that was the way they said it. I don't know who to give the credit to, but one of our Thriviver members said, one of the most important things that I have realized is that sometimes you just have to do it afraid. Find that person to tell, even if you're afraid. Find that therapist, even if you're afraid. Do it afraid. Take that next step, even if you're afraid. And that was really good because that is definitely where I started. I was so afraid. I was afraid of my own shadow, and having to do so many things afraid, I realized I did that. I did it afraid. And I was afraid for so long in my youth. Not of my parents. I was lucky that way, or my sisters or my dear friends, but just afraid, and I didn't know who I was. I was a very happy, and I did plays from the time I was 7 years old, and I was good at it, and I had all this confidence, and then that sexual assault and all of the brainwashing and what happened to me just destroyed that. I had no confidence. I didn't know who I was. And I really didn't fully get it back, like deep inside of me, until that workshop experience at age 30. And all of a sudden it just like entered my body again. Like, you are this amazing, worthwhile human being who has so many gifts and talents, and you can give back to people in so many ways by telling your story, the arts, by getting on stage, by acting, by singing, by music, by art, by all the things that I do, public speaking, all those things that I now do that have come into play. It came rushing back to me, and it never left me. I've had hard moments since the age of 30. I've had many hard things that have still happened in my life. Um, Financial stresses, marital stresses, my own mistakes in life that I've made, trying to figure out how to win back those years as a teenager, as a young teen and underdeveloped teen. I made mistakes that I feel badly about and that I've that I've tried to rectify in my own life, and I've tried to help other people do the same and help them avoid the mistakes that you will make because of your trauma and to deal with your trauma. And it does take a lifetime. It's a journey. Um, I don't know. Those are some of the things that I think you have to find your self worth and realize that you're the adult now. And even what happened to you, even though it wasn't your fault, you didn't deserve it. It was not your fault. You are carrying the shame of it. You are carrying this burden of shame and guilt that is not yours. And so when you can find a course like I did, or a person, a therapist, someone, some way to relieve that part, to get that out of you, that you are not carrying the shame, the guilt, the blame, and you give it back where it belongs, which is to the perpetrator. You give
Yeah.
them, they're the ones that should be ashamed of themselves. They're the ones that are guilty. They're the ones to blame. That's what I wanted people to know from telling my own story, that people that don't know are not to blame. When you don't know something, you don't know. My parents didn't know that there were such things as predators like him. They'd never had one in their own lives. They'd never been around one. We had a very safe community, a very close community. Um, it, it just, they didn't see it. I don't blame my parents. Other people do, but I'm like, it was 1971 when this family moved into our neighborhood and became our friends. We met them at church. People think you can trust people, especially my sweet parents who love everybody. I've grown up with that my whole life. You love people, you do for them, you serve them. That's been my upbringing. And I still believe that. I still believe that all of my experiences have a purpose, even though I wouldn't wish them on any other person. I know that as an adult, I can use what happened to me to shine a light for somebody else and to be a voice for someone else who is still suffering in silence. And so hopefully, if you can get a hold of my book, The Jan Broberg Story, or listen to my podcast, it's on Apple, Spotify, all the places. The Jan Broberg Show, that's my podcast. If you're a survivor, I think it's really helpful because I interview experts about how we are trying to help,
Mhm.
and what we can do as survivors. So experts and stories. And then, just watching a friend of the family on Peacock so that you can see, oh, this is how I was manipulated as a child, because you really see it's so well written and so well acted and so well done. Um, I hope it will change the world as people watch the show, read the book, listen to the podcast, or come join my online community, Thrivivors, THRIVIV, Thrive,
Mhm.
VORS.org, or the Jan Broberg Foundation. Maybe just know my name. Just put my name in Google and you'll come
Yes.
up with everything that I do, and that my son, who's helped me build this business, that we're trying to make it a business. We're trying to make it it's a nonprofit business. It's a 501c3, which is a nonprofit. We're looking for donors and trying to get more retreats to more people, get more people on our Thriviver community that can scale and go worldwide, kind of like being in a support group like AA has gone worldwide. It's that kind of a support group with experts who come in and can help us maneuver the healing path. Um, and our foundation is also built on making legislative changes and public policy changes, because we have to have trauma informed people that interface with this kind of abuse and abusers, because they're tricky. And so we need trauma informed so that people are believed, and trauma informed so that predators are not let off the hook, because only like 2% of people who report rape or child abuse is the person on the other end of that abuse ever taken through and convicted. It's really
Yeah.
low, the numbers. So we're those three things: healing through community, education for prevention, and public policy change. Those are the three pillars of the Jan Broberg Foundation. So
Mhm.
I got to do one of them today, which was raise awareness and education because of you doing what you do.
Yes.
Thank you so much for this.
Thank you. Thank
Are there
you. And I will
other
put all the links in
okay.
the episode. Yeah.
Okay, great, and I
And
appreciate any other questions or a final question or anything?
yeah, I just want to talk to you about the numbers here. Here in Brazil, in the first, let me see, in the first 4 months in this year, 2023, there were more than 17,000 records of sexual violations against children, and 14,000, like you said, took place inside the victim's home or a family member or something, someone they know. It's an alarming number.
Yes, and that's so different than what people seem to want to continue to believe. 14,000 out of
Yeah.
17,000 cases were somebody the child knew in their home or
In
their close
four
community.
months only.
4 months. That was just the first 4 months. Oh
Yes.
my word. So, yeah, when you add that up, I bet there were, you know, at least 60,000 cases this year that were reported. How many were not reported?
Yes.
Probably 10 times that number. So that
Yeah.
means you're talking
Mhm.
6 million cases. How, I mean, you really have people really have to understand that it is so underreported, especially if it was a boy or a man that was assaulted. That
Yeah.
is really underreported. But even for women and girls, it's just not reported because people basically go, nothing's going to happen. So we'll just keep our child away from this person. Well, the problem is that person is either a family member and they're going to go on, if they somehow get cut off from this child, they'll just go find another child. They're not sending people to jail. They're not going to stop. That's a proven thing in my own story. Maybe once in a while, I believe if it's like an older sibling who maybe had somebody that sexualized them and now they're acting out, that child also needs help and therapy to make sure that they can reclaim, the natural development so that they don't become an offender. They don't become a perpetrator, but they were a perpetrator to a sibling. That happens a lot, or to a cousin. I've heard a lot of stories that way. And so that person, that older child, or I've heard one story where the child was actually younger, but a big kid, big in stature, but it was to his older sister. But she was tiny and petite, and he was big, and he had been molested by another family member, like an uncle, I believe, and maybe even raped. And then he started doing it to his sister. And so, luckily, the state where they lived gave therapy to the boy as well as to the girl who had been harmed. And they both came out on the other end, and they have a relationship today. And he's a father, and he's a good person. But that is rare, that you actually have a situation where all the people that need help get help. It just often doesn't happen. So we can't let the predators just go on because we don't report. We got to report, and then we got to be on it like Blue Bonnet. Sorry, I don't know if that's a margarine. That's a butter in the United States. Blue Bonnet. Just a silly saying. Probably doesn't translate well. Anyway,
I don't know what
um,
that is.
exactly. You're like, what? On it like Blue Bonnet? Like Blue Bonnet is a butter that like butter that you spread on, manteca. I don't know what it's called in Portuguese, but butter on your bread.
Yeah.
Put butter on your bread.
Mm-hmm.
And Blue Bonnet is you can cut all of this out, but Blue Bonnet is a brand of butter. And so people
Uh-huh. Yeah,
used to
understand.
say, I'm on it, like the butter is on it,
Like
like Blue
butter.
Bonnet.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I stick on you.
Yes, I'm sticking to it. I'm gonna do it. I'm on it like Blue Bonnet. I don't know. Dumb saying. Take that out. um, you can see my personality. I'm a quirky, fun person, and I'm a happy person. And I can honestly say that I have a lot of joy in my life. And even though I've been through several marriages and divorces, like I said, I I I have things that I learned that were part of my healing journey from each one of them. And I am still on that journey, but the way I've been able to free up the negativity in my life is remarkable. I really truly know it's possible, and I I have other, other things that I do. I listen to a book called The Power of Now often. I'll just listen even if I'm going to sleep. I'll sometimes listen to it because it talks about being in the present moment. Like right now, sitting here in this present moment, is there really anything wrong, anything to complain about, anything to be negative about? No, not really. Now, I might walk out of this room and this podcast and go, okay, life is here, there are things to deal with, but in the moment of dealing with something, you don't need to have 25 other things to be thinking about and worried about. Just be in the present moment. Learn from your past that it actually doesn't follow you into the present. You actually can let it go. You actually can. Even, I mean, I'm a pretty religious person, so I use the word forgiveness, but you don't have to forgive your perpetrator, but you can certainly let them go so that they're not
Yeah.
controlling your life anymore. And that is really important. And for me, forgiveness didn't mean a free pass. I forgave him a long time ago. I let him go. I let what he did to me go. But I still wish I had known then what I know now. I should have, I wish I had known to go and file a report, because even just filing a report with his name in the report, even though the statute of limitations for me to do anything about what he did to me was over, I couldn't ask them to press charges and do all of the legal things, but I could have filed a report. And if I had known that and done that, I might have saved the next 5 girls that were, or the next four. Yeah, 4 girls that I know of after me. Maybe because the second time, maybe that parent would have gone to the police and filed a report. And then the police would have seen, oh my gosh, there's the same man, 2 little girls. We got a pattern here. We got a problem here. Maybe it would have been taken more seriously. Maybe something could have been done. So I feel really badly about not knowing that. But again, you don't know what you don't know. And now that I know, I tell everyone at least file a report, even if you don't want to go any further because you're too scared or your child, whatever your reason might be. But file the report so that the name is there in the system so that when it happens to another child and that parent or that child, that teenager tells somebody and they've go file a report, the name is there. And now if you have two, and then what if there was a third? Just file a report. Even if you see something and it's not your own child, but you see something and you know something is wrong, file a report. Say, and it most likely is going to be with a family member. It most likely is,
Yeah.
and it's going to be really hard. But if all you do is file a report, and sometimes you can do that anonymously, and that name is sitting there, then when it happens to somebody else, something else, even though you didn't see the abuse, you still can file a report and just have it sitting there. That's my final word. Now I'm done. Just to try to start, help the process. Yeah,
I
great.
just want to say that you are an inspiration for
Thank
me and all my listeners. You are not ashamed to tell your story, and this is so good. Serves for inspiration and courage for other people to seek help, to seek knowledge, and I think this is most amazing thing that we
you.
as a human being can do. We can do not much, but this we can.
Yes, this we can. And when you can tell your story, it will have a ripple effect. It will probably
Yes.
save other kids in the future, and it can also heal things from your past and for you and others. I'm just always surprised at how much just this one thing, the power of talking and telling and not keeping a lethal icky secret, because it just destroys you on the inside. And I do think that you're right. This is what we can do. And I thank you so much for
Yes.
allowing me to share my story and my healing process. There are many, many ways to heal, and many good people like yourself who help us do that. And I think it is important to, you owe it to yourself to find that you are worth it and that you shouldn't be ashamed. You didn't do anything wrong. You know, that belongs over there on that person who conned and manipulated and groomed you and the people around you. That's why they didn't believe it. That's why they didn't see it. But that's not your fault. I just hope people will know that that really is the truth. And even if they can't believe it yet, they can hear it from me. And when you finally realize that and you tell, your healing will get on a fast track. You'll be finding shows like, for me, it was watching Oprah Winfrey every day when I was in my 20s and 30s. Well, I watched Oprah religiously because she always would say the real words. She'd talk really honestly about these things, and
Yeah.
nobody was doing that, So I loved that. I read books, not only feel the fear and do it anyway, but you know, write yourself whole, meaning like writing, like I am writing a story. So it's
Mhm.
called Write Yourself Whole, to be a whole person again. That was a really good
Mhm.
book I read. I've read so many great books about love yourself. Um, uh, like Love Yourself Like Your Life Depends on It. Another one where you do mantras in the mirror to yourself over and over and over again every day. And it will change if you do it out loud. It changed something in my brain. Like, I don't beat myself up like I used to, but it was from that book and doing what it said. I just, there's a lot of ways you can heal, and something will work for one person and not another, but continue to find the path, the therapist. Know that you can have more joy. You may need medication. You may be somebody that has chronic depression or anxiety. Um, don't be afraid of that either. I happen to only need it for that short period of time. And then my serotonin was back and I went off of it, and I've never had to be really on anything again, except when I went through menopause. That was hard. I had all these weird emotions. I did do some therapies then, some hormones and stuff.
Mm.
But anyway, I just don't be afraid to try many many things, and come and get involved in an online community. I'm sure there's something like that, you know. Um, I mean, Facebook is everywhere, all in the around the world. I'm sure start a group, you know, or come and join mine. It just, don't be alone. Don't feel alone in it. I don't want people to feel alone.
Mhm. That's very important.
Very important. Thank you so much for this opportunity. You were just so sweet and so intelligent and so wonderful. I really appreciate being able
Thank you.
to share. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you very much for agreeing to speak with me. Our conversation was extremely important. You can feel free to say more if you wish. I'm just happy with this opportunity to talk to you. Thank you again.
Thank you. I think we've I think we've said enough. I think that my main points
Yeah.
are there. Yeah.
um, I've already talked about every question I have. You talk about every question I have. I want to talk about relationships. You talk about your son. You talk too. So I think we cover all things I want to ask you, and it's amazing. All amazing. Your story is, like I said, an inspiration for all of us.
Thank you so much.